Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really significant and unfortunately ongoing global issue, the Russo-Ukrainian War.
That's right. And for this deep dive, our main source is Wikipedia. It gives us a pretty broad overview, good starting point to map out this, well, very complex conflict.
Exactly. And our goal here is to really pull out the key events, understand the timeline, and maybe highlight some aspects for you that aren't always front and center.
Yes, we want to distill it down.
Yeah.
We know you listening have different levels of background knowledge, so we'll try to make the crucial information clear and give you a solid grasp of the core issues.
Okay then, let's dive in. To really understand how we got here, where do we need to start? Before 2014.
Definitely before 2014, you have to look back at the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Ukraine becoming independent. That was a massive change.
And Russia recognized it initially, but there were underlying tensions.
Absolutely. Tensions about Ukraine's sovereignty, its direction, leaning towards the West. Then you had things like the Orange Revolution, those big protests that really showed a split, different paths being taken.
Right. And thinking about precursors, what about the Russo-Georgian War in 2008? Was that like a sign of things to come?
Many see it that way, yes. It sort of demonstrated Russia's willingness to use military force in its neighborhood, especially when it felt its influence was threatened. It set a bit of a precedent, you could say.
Interesting context. Okay, so let's jump to 2014. That feels like the really pivotal year. What kicked things off?
2014 was huge. It starts with the Euromaidan protests in Ukraine, massive demonstrations wanting closer ties with Europe, pushing against corruption.
And that led to President Yanukovych being ousted. He was seen as pro-Moscow.
Exactly. His removal was a major flashpoint, seen very differently in Kiev versus Moscow, obviously. And almost immediately, things escalated. Well, you saw pro-Russian protests pop up in the south and east of Ukraine. And then, crucially, these unmarked soldiers, the so-called Little Green Men, appeared in Crimea.
Ah, yes, the little green men, Russian troops, essentially.
Essentially, yes. Which led very quickly to this disputed referendum and Russia formally annexing Crimea, a major violation of international law.
And quite blatant, too. There were admissions later, weren't there, about how it was orchestrated.
Yes, Igor Girkin, a key figure involved, later admitted quite openly that they basically forced the Crimean parliament members to vote for annexation. It wasn't exactly spontaneous.
Wow, okay, so Crimea is annexed. But the trouble didn't stop there, did it? The Donbas region flared up, too.
That's right. In April 2014, fighting erupted in the Donbas, eastern Ukraine. Russian-backed militants seized government buildings, declared these so-called People's Republics in Donetsk and Luhansk, the DPR and LPR.
And this wasn't just a local thing. Russia was involved from the start.
Oh, definitely. There's overwhelming evidence. Russia provided covert military support troops, heavy weapons, funding. International courts later confirmed Russia had significant control over these separatist forces right from 2014. That support was key. It stopped Ukraine from ending the conflict quickly.
So a really intense start in 2014, but then the conflict seemed to shift, didn't it? What happened between, say, 2015 and 2021?
Yeah, it entered this phase of sort of frozen conflict almost. The Minsk II agreement was signed in February 2015. It was supposed to lead to a ceasefire, political settlement.
But it didn't really work.
Not really, no. It was never fully implemented. The fighting in Donbas became this grinding trench warfare. Lots of ceasefire violations, constant tension, but the front lines didn't move much. A real stalemate.
Were there any major flare-ups during that time, even within the stalemate?
Oh, yes. The battle for Debaltseve actually happened after the Minsk II ceasefire was supposed to start. That showed how fragile it was. And there was heavy fighting around Avdiivka in 2017. Just these periodic, intense bursts of violence.
So years of this uneasy, simmering conflict. And then came February 2022, a massive escalation.
A complete game changer.
Huh.
On February 24th, Putin announced the special military operation, and Russia launched a full-scale invasion from multiple directions.
The stated goals were demilitarization and denazification, right?
Those were the stated justifications, yes. Widely seen internationally as, well, pretextual, as propaganda to justify the invasion.
And the world reacted very strongly.
Immediately. Widespread condemnation, heavy sanctions imposed on Russia, and a huge outpouring of support for Ukraine. Military aid, financial help, humanitarian assistance.
Russia initially tried to take Kyiv, the capital, didn't they? But that didn't succeed.
No. They faced really fierce Ukrainian resistance and serious logistical problems, too. By early April 2022, they had to abandon that push for Kyiv and regroup in the east and south.
And Ukraine managed some significant counteroffensives later that year.
They did. In late summer and autumn 2022, Ukraine pushed back hard, particularly in the Kharkiv region in the northeast, and crucially, retook the city of Kherson in the south. Big morale boosts and strategic wins.
But even with those setbacks, Russia doubled down on territorial claims.
Yes. In September 2022, after holding these widely condemned referendums in occupied areas, Russia announced the annexation of 4 Ukrainian provinces: Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, even though they didn't fully control them. Again, internationally rejected.
So where does that leave us now, moving through 2023 into the present?
It's largely settled into another phase of attritional warfare, a real grind. Intense fighting along a vast front line, but territorial gains for either side have been small and very costly. Lots of offensives, counteroffensives, but no major breakthroughs recently.
Though there was that Ukrainian incursion into Russia itself in Kursk Oblast in August 2024.
It was a notable development, yes. Ukraine claimed to have seized territory and captured Russian soldiers inside Russia. A shift of the dynamic for sure.
And then reports started emerging about North Korean troops getting involved.
Yes, that's a really significant and concerning development. Multiple sources started reporting late in 2024 that North Korean soldiers were deployed to Russia, potentially even near Kursk.
And Russia confirmed this eventually.
They did in April 2025. Russia officially acknowledged North Korean participation, saying they provided significant assistance, specifically mentioning help in retaking territory in Kursk. That adds a whole new complex dimension to the conflict and its international ramifications.
Absolutely. And amidst all this fighting, we have to mention the human cost and the allegations of war crimes.
Tragically, yes. There are widespread, credible reports of war crimes and severe human rights abuses. The International Criminal Court is investigating and has issued arrest warrants, including for President Putin.
And the UN has documented issues in occupied areas.
Yes. UN reports detail things like forced Russification, trying to erase Ukrainian culture, indoctrination of children, very serious violations in Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine.
It's clearly not just a conventional war, either. There's hybrid warfare, cyber attacks.
Definitely. Cyber attacks against Ukraine have been ongoing. Plus, information warfare, disinformation campaigns. That's been a huge part of it. And we've seen the wider fallout, the energy disputes, the Nord Stream sabotage mystery, the complete breakdown in Russia-NATO relations.
It's also strange that neither side has formally declared war, right? Russia still calls it a special military operation.
That's true. Legally and rhetorically, it remains framed that way by Moscow, despite being, by any objective measure, a full-scale interstate war.
How have people in Ukraine and Russia reacted over these years?
In Ukraine, public opinion has solidified massively against Russia. Any pre-2014 goodwill is gone. There's incredible national unity in resisting the invasion. In Russia, it's harder to gauge accurately, due to media control. Official polls show support, but independent sources suggest it's much more divided and complex under the surface.
And the international aid for Ukraine remains critical.
Absolutely vital. Military and financial support from the U.S., European countries, and others has been essential for Ukraine's ability to defend itself.
So looking back, we've gone from the Soviet collapse through the 2014 triggers in Crimea and Donbas, the years of stalemate, the full invasion in 2022, the counteroffensives, annexations, and now this brutal, grinding war with recent North Korean involvement.
It's a long, tragic arc, each phase building on the last, unresolved tensions exploding into wider conflict, and the global implications just keep growing.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. Given this history, the escalations, and now this very worrying factor of North Korean troops reportedly on the ground, what could the really long-term consequences be? Not just for Ukraine and Russia, but for, well, the entire global order.
That is the big question, isn't it? Does this signal new, more dangerous alliances forming? Could this conflict metastasize further? The potential ripple effects are immense and, frankly, quite unsettling to think about.
Definitely something to keep pondering. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Russo-Ukrainian War. We hope this overview was helpful, and we encourage you to continue seeking out information on this incredibly important and ongoing situation.